Welcome to the Health and Wealth Power Hour, the podcast that provides you with the knowledge and insights you need to achieve physical, mental, and financial well-being. I'm your host, Harlan Pickett, a business consultant who's passionate about helping people achieve a more balanced and healthier life. Each week, we'll deep dive into topics related to health and wealth, including retirement income planning, innovative healthcare solutions, alternative funded health plans, and specific actions individuals and business owners can take to gain control of their finances, have access to affordable quality health care, and achieve peace of mind. We'll also be joined by innovative experts who will share their knowledge and insights on prevalent topics. So, whether you're looking to grow your wealth or improve your health, you've come to the right place. Get ready to be informed, inspired, and empowered. Let's get started. All right, gang, man, we have got a good one for you today. It is so good to have you with us. My name is Harlan Pickett. I am the host of the Health and Wealth Power Hour. Thank you for being with us, and thank most of all Dana Diaz for our return engagement. I'll tell you what, it was such an outstanding episode when we did it the first time. Not an outstanding subject, let's not get that mistaken, but an outstanding episode. By far our most commented on and impactful podcast to date, at least from the comments I have received myself as I have been out in travels and speaking in other places. This episode, the one that we recorded the first time, Dana, it's so impactful in so many people. And I think it's because it touched on something that everyone's had a touch of somewhere in their life. So quick, for those of you who didn't get the first one, be sure and go out and find that episode with Dana Diaz. She is the best-selling author of Gasping for Air, easier for me to say, The Stranglehold of Narcissistic Abuse. And she has now released the sequel, which is actually a prequel.
This is a prequel, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's the answer to the first book where people were asking, how do you end up in a situation where you're in an abusive relationship, a toxic marriage? And it goes back to our childhood. And mine was not so much fun all the time, being raised by two narcissistic parents, specifically a mother who was a teenager when she became pregnant with me and didn't want me before I was even born and wanted me even less after I was born. And then she married a man, not my biological father, who was physically and verbally abusive. So between the two of them, they sure did a number on me. But, you know, the good news is, and the reason why I love to hear that people have so many comments and such, it pains me to know that so many people can relate to my experience, but it makes my heart happy to know that maybe somebody feels a little less alone and maybe somebody can understand their situation a little better. And I know for me, at least in the field of health, mental health specifically, I have had so many people who work in mental health reach out to me and thank me for writing this book because, well, both books now, actually, Choking on Shame was a #1 new release as well, the prequel. But it's because it gives them an idea, because like you, a lot of people don't understand this experience. They don't understand. They have people sitting in front of them, you know, telling them about these things that they've been through and things their mother did to them, father, uncle, whoever. And I'm able to verbalize it in a way where they get it. But they're the people that are like me and have been through this stuff are also understanding their situation better, because there's so much confusion and you don't know what's what, and you don't know if you're just too sensitive or if you're so traumatized that you're not seeing things clearly. But I think there is a very clear line of what is abuse and what is not. And my definition of abuse is when you intentionally harm somebody in whatever way that is. If it's intentional, that's abusive.
You know, we talked before we started recording a little bit about the first time that we recorded a podcast and the impact it had on me too. Not, you know, thank the Lord, I didn't have a relationship with my parents like you did. I had a wonderful relationship and a very loving family. Once again, not all peaches and cream. There's always going to be things that happen.
Right.
But it was in no way, shape, or form that I could have told you, I know how you feel. Can I have empathy all day long? And I certainly did with your situation. And once again, I've spoke about it a number of times. I've brought it up. I've shared it with people I thought that needed to hear it. But the overwhelming response that people had to that particular show, and how many times I heard people say, I shared it with this person, or I shared it with that person, or I shared it. And I needed to hear this. Also, I did have one lady tell me I needed to hear this because I always was afraid that I was in an abusive relationship, but I didn't want to be. And so I didn't allow myself to see the things that were happening to me and around me. And I really just thought I was a bad person and everything really was always my fault.
Well, that's interesting you say that, because that's the premise of my second book, is that I was the scapegoat child. I was made to believe, everything was my fault. The way you felt is my fault. If something happened, even if I had no part in it, it was my fault. I internalized this shame that I was burdened with. So certainly in my first marriage, I felt much the same as this person that was, sharing this with you. And I too, if anyone out there is relating to this, let me tell you, I was abused as a child. I had child services, police, the school involved in things. Yet it took me 24 years into my first marriage, that the relationship lasted 25 years, but 24 years into it is when it finally registered that, oh my gosh, I was abused. I'm being abused in this marriage for this long, because I know what abuse is. I know what abuse is. And that was not happening. I wouldn't see it. But, it's interesting there. I don't know which social media platform it was on, but I saw this little video of, and it was, representing what an abusive relationship looks like. And it was a woman. It goes both ways, but she had these rose-colored glasses on. And when she had them on, you could see what she was seeing. And she was seeing the handsome man she was with smiling and being, bringing her flowers. But when she took it off, oh, you saw him raging and abusing, hitting her, yelling at her, and it's just so interesting because it's all about your perspective. It's what you choose to see and what you choose to believe about your situation. And I think, we talk about gaslighting and trauma bonds and all this stuff, but I know that it took me a long time to realize I had been gaslighting myself all that time. Never mind them abusing me and them manipulating the way I think and telling me that's not real and you're crazy and you're sensitive and whatever. I was telling myself I was not seeing things for what they really were. But once I finally did, and you know what it took? It took me sitting down. It took him making not one, not two, but multiple attempts to kill me. And literally, he wanted to kill me. He told our neighbors he was planning to kill me. He wrote me emails and text messages. So, it was very clear he wanted me dead. It took multiple attempts for me to go to finally get an order of protection. And it was when I was filling out that form. You have to check the boxes. Did this person do this? Does this person do that? And you check yes or no. And I checked yes on all of them. Actually wrote about this in a chapter in Gasping for Air. And I thought, oh no, there's no way. Because it says, then you do qualify for an order of protection because you're in an abusive situation. I thought, oh no, not me. I know what abuse is. This isn't happening. Let me go back. I must have misread some of these questions. And I went back and sure enough, every one of them I checked yes. And that is actually the moment that it hit me that I was like, oh my gosh. And certainly I had all the effects and the symptoms, I'm still, I'm getting much better. I've gone through the healing process and it'll be never ending. But, the depression, the anxiety, the CPTSD with all the triggers, because it is like psychological warfare, even if they are physically, threatening you as well. Really, the effect is psychological. And that's the interesting thing about my childhood is there was so much physical abuse, much more. I honestly can't even say my ex-husband had ever put his hands on me. He affected me in every other way, and there was sexual abuse. But as far as, physically, like beating me or whatever, that honestly didn't happen, but it did in my childhood. And it's a very interesting thing that, when your parents, and in my case, both parents participated in putting their hands on me. At one point, my mother's hands were around my neck, and I was blacking out, and I thought I was going to die. It's a very interesting thing to me that all these years later, and even back then, the physical didn't faze me as much. It was more the mental aspect. Even being in that moment of losing consciousness because she had restricted, I could not peel her fingers off of my neck. And for days after, you could see the bruises where her hands had been, where her fingers had been. But what did I do? I wore turtlenecks so nobody could see, because nobody needed to see that stuff. And I just kept my head down. I always said I always like to fly under the radar. But it was the mental aspect. Knowing that somebody, specifically my mother, wanted me dead.
Right.
That's what I struggled with more than her having her hands around my neck and trying to kill me. It's the same thing in my first marriage. He wanted to kill me. I saw these texts. He swung a crowbar at my head. There was knives and guns involved. I'm still standing. Thank the Lord. But really what stays with me, it is what's in my heart, the pain of knowing that somebody loathes me that much to not want me to be alive, to be a mother to my son, to go on and live without them. That's the hard thing to live with.
So obviously the correlation here of you not thinking you were being abused is because of the way you were abused, the physical nature of the abuse whenever you were younger. I'm sure you talk about that in your book, right?
I believe that was the connection because, we still live in a society, and I don't know if many people realize this. When you talk about abuse, especially in a marriage, but even in child abuse, people think black eyes, bruises, marks on your body. You don't think about the other stuff. You don't think about the long-term mental effects. You don't think about, in a marriage, sexual abuse and financial abuse and just even intimidation and the threats and all that stuff. But we have a society that hasn't caught up to this idea that it's not just black eyes that determine what abuse is. In 1994, which I know that's back in the 90s, we're in 2024 now, so it's a while, but it's not that long ago. I was in college in 1994. So this is in my lifetime, but 1994, there was a Women's Violence Act that was finally passed that said that you could now press charges here in our country, in the United States of America. You could finally press charges against your husband, if that's who was, if you were experiencing domestic violence or any kind of abuse. But 1994, that's not that long ago. Prior to that, you had no recourse. You had zero recourse. And think about society back then. We think more like in the 50s and 60s, but even in the 70s, women were shamed if they wanted to divorce their husband. So now you have to add that to it, that, now your children, are going to be illegitimate and you're a terrible mother, and the broken home and all these pressures we put on women to stay in those situations and tolerate it. Talk about keeping your head down. They would put their concealer on, curl their hair, much like mine is now, cover the face, keep your head down, go to the grocery store. And if people saw you and they saw evidence of physical abuse, they saw your black eye, did they say anything? No. Even the police, the legal system, judicial system, they considered it a family matter until 1994. But even since then, we are still having people believe that that's just something you deal with at home. You know, that's not something the courts have to deal with. It's not something the judges have to deal with. The police shouldn't have to deal with it. Police probably deal with it more than any other parts of our system. But it's just a shame that there's no recourse for anybody. At least in my marriage, though, once you realize you're in a situation, you do have a choice. You're a grown person. You can walk out the door if it's safe for you to do that and if that's what you choose. But being a child, I had no choice. I had no choice. I did run. After those hands were around my neck and I got thrown down a half a flight of stairs, I ran the hell out of that house. I got my butt out of there. How was I going to sleep in that house that night? But you know what? I got called in as a runaway. I got picked up at school by the police. Even got turned away that night by some people, because parents were worried that they would be considered to be harboring a runaway of some sort, and people don't want to get involved. But here's the sadder part. When my first book came out, this was even before my second book about my childhood, somebody from my childhood called me. I didn't recognize their voice at first, but when they introduced themselves, they said, well, I'm so glad that I'm hearing your voice and that you're doing okay. And I said thank you, but I thought that an odd thing to say and asked them about that. And this was somebody that knew me from the time I was probably 5 or 6 years old up until I went to college. So throughout my entire childhood. And she said to me, I didn't know your stepfather very well, but she said, your mother was always quite melancholy. There was a sadness to her, like she wasn't happy with her life. And she said, I could tell with you, you were sometimes withdrawn, but sometimes you'd come out of your shell. But she says, I always thought of you. She said, after I didn't see you anymore, I always thought I would see you on TV, that your stepfather had killed you and your mother both in one of these murder-suicides. And I thought, she couldn't have been the only one who saw it. And it makes me so sad that what if that would have happened with these people? I mean, do I have the answer? Do I think somebody could have come in and saved the day? I do. And I think that people should, but people don't. People turn an eye to it. Just like in my marriage, there was actually one time that I did have a black eye in my first marriage. He did not give me that black eye. I actually, honestly, I actually did fall into something. The clumsy person I am, my nickname is Grace. And I got a really good shiner. I gave it to myself, but you want to know what the funny thing is? For weeks, it went from dark to purple to pink to green to yellow. I finally said to somebody I worked with, I said, not one person. I have been to a family barbecue. I have been doing groceries. I have been going to work. Not one person, not one soul has asked me if I'm okay. And she had her head down, kind of whispering. She said, well, we all just assume your husband did that to you and we don't want to say anything. And I thought, wow. So here I was now in childhood and in my first marriage, people clearly, even though I would never speak about it, I would never expose the truth until now, but people saw it, but nobody did anything in either circumstance. And that pains me, because how many children have to die? How many children have to go through this because nobody speaks up, even if they think something is happening? Err on the side of caution. And then in a marriage, because guess what? As a child, they're saying right now, this is our CDC in our country, this is their newest statistic that they have on their website, is that 50%, half of all children in the U.S. right now, under 18 years old, will experience anywhere from 1 to 4 incidents of bullying, violence, domestic abuse, something within that category. And they have decided that the effects of witnessing it are the same as experiencing it. So you have we look at the suicide rate, we look at the depression in this country, anxiety. How many people do we know are on medications for anxiety and going to therapy? And then we look at the violence, not just domestic violence, but crime as a whole. Because you have some of these kids coming out of these homes acting just like the abusive parent. And then the other half are like me that are just sitting in the corner crying and hoping nobody sees us and nobody hears us because we just don't want to, experience any consequence for it. But that makes me very sad to know this, that half of all children, I mean, if any of us has kids or had kids when they were younger, think about a classroom full of, sweet little 5 and 6-year-old children gluing popsicle sticks together in kindergarten, and you're telling me half of them? That's too many. That's way too many.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it should be a rare thing, right? I mean, this is 50%. That's more than common. That's way more.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
It should, 30% would bother me. 25% would bother me, but half, that it makes me very, I don't want to say I've lost hope in humanity, because I think there's still good people out there, but I think it's a wake-up call, that we have to be a little more conscientious about how we treat each other. I tell people, was I a perfect parent? No, I wasn't a perfect. I was dodging my own bullets, literally and figuratively in my marriage while trying to raise our son in the midst of it. But my God, I tried my damnedest to make sure that little boy knew he was loved and that he was happy. And he's 21 now, and actually he has a lot of friends. He's very social. He has a great job, very well liked at work, and successful, for whatever that means to somebody,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
doing very well. And so it makes me happy that even though I know he didn't come out of it unscathed, that whatever efforts I put forth, or maybe I was just lucky, but he's okay. He's going to be okay. And if there ever were a time he wanted to deal with the rest of it, certainly I would be there and help him with that. But how many kids don't do that? How many kids end up doing drugs, taking their lives, falling into a life of crime, spending more of their life in prison than out of it. And I just feel like we can make a change. Can one person change the world? No. Can the two of us together here change the world? No, but we could change our home life. Maybe instead of people sitting on their phones at the dinner table, you could actually sit down and have a meal and talk to the people, even if it's just you and your spouse or your grandkid, your adult kid, whatever. You can ask them, how was your day? What are you passionate about lately? What's, anything, but give them that focus and that attention. Make them, feel like they matter, like they mean something. Because I feel like too often, especially I see little toddlers now, they're always using their mom or dad's phone or on a tablet. And believe me, my son needed his baby Einstein tapes over and over and over. He liked that baby Neptune, and it was like my 1 hour of peace. But we have to give our interaction. We have to give of ourselves. And I think if we could start in our home, be kind to your spouse, be kind to your mother, be kind to your kids, they will go out in the world and spread that kindness wherever they go, whether it be at school or at work or at church, at the library, at the post office, wherever. Maybe eventually, some years down the line, we could all sit around and sing Kumbaya, but at least be respectful and kind. That's the one thing, because I think that too many people take their relationships for granted. And we're all guilty of it. I mean, I could have a really bad day and my husband comes home and I'm like, "Arr," and then I have to mindfully say, okay, this is my best friend, my partner in life. He's the one person I should actually be the nicest to,
Right.
And I got to pull back that comfort level a little and remember, he's on my side. He's my person. We got to keep him there. He's my ally. So, just a mindset thing. If anyone's asking, what can I do? Be kind. Just like if you know somebody who might be in an abusive situation, confronting them, telling them that, they need to get out of it, that's not helpful. But you can share this podcast. Maybe something will resonate in their head, just like that last one. If you look up the last one that was more specific to abusive marriages, it might help somebody feel a little less alone and give them the strength to know that there is another life for them. And maybe they might start thinking of making a change, because it's not just about the wife or the husband getting out of that relationship. It's about saving those kids too.
Yeah.
Because like I said, my son doesn't even know the half of what went on in our house, and he will never read my book. And that's just kind of like our unspoken agreement, and I'm glad for it. But that doesn't mean he came out of it unscathed. Kids see and hear a lot more than we give them credit for. And as they get older, they start to understand it more, and they start to create ideas about roles in relationships and purpose in life. And they start to make those things mean something about themselves. I mean, that's what happened to me. I internalized this shame. My mother was so ashamed that she had a child as an unwed teenage mother. But it was my fault. And it was my fault I wasn't a boy, because she thought I was going to be a boy and I'm a girl. And it was my fault she couldn't name me what she wanted to because I'm a girl. And, it was just everything. But the interesting thing, and I know I brought this up in the beginning, is that, people look at my brother, who is the biological child of my mother and stepfather, and they think that I must be crazy and I must be lying about my experiences because they are so good with my brother. And honestly, I can't dispute that. My brother got the parents that they denied me of. He got support. He got love. He was wanted. All the things parents should be, with, of course, like you said, every family's got their things. But he would be standing here telling you that he has the best parents in the universe. Whereas I had a mother who had her hands around my neck and tried to kill me. I had a stepfather from the time I was about 5 years old up until I left the house at 18 and a half, telling me that nobody ever even wanted me, I shouldn't exist, that nobody would ever love me. I was, even as a young child, that peanut butter and jelly sandwich was going to make me fat and give me wide hips like a middle-aged woman, and then nobody's going to want me. It was always something. I was always being criticized, made to feel deficient. I was wrong. There was nothing I could win the Nobel Peace Prize right now, and it would not be enough. Well, why didn't you win 2 of them? Even publishing 2 books, I thought that was pretty impressive. I never imagined I'd publish 2 books.
Right.
Not one phone call, not even my brother. He drank the Kool-Aid. He thinks it's me. But, people don't realize it can happen in a house. There's actually an interesting book came out in the early 90s called A Child Called It. And it's a true story of the man who wrote it. It's about his childhood. He was the 3rd of 5 children, and he was the only one of the 5 that was abused, and horrifically abused. And people saw it. His teachers saw it. His father saw it. The other 4 siblings saw it. And what's terrible is that they all let it happen, because we go back to, back during these times in the 70s, 80s, even early 90s, that was a family matter. But in that book, I think the thing that really struck me and made me just feel, the whole book's just, it's a hard read for somebody that's been through stuff similar. But he tells of one instance where his mother told him, well, you better get ready, you're going to get it. And this boy had been burned. He had been malnourished, not allowed to eat for days. Just the things she would do just to him. The father actually took the other 4 children out for ice cream, knowing that his wife was going to do something horrible to that one child. And that's a tough one for me, But this isn't the only time. I mean, my mother, when I would go to her and tell her about things that were happening, thinking she's my mother, she's supposed to protect me, she would tell me I'm lying to get attention. That, this was my favorite. He wouldn't do those things to you if he didn't care about you. He just loves you so much that you just make him so angry when you don't listen. And we wonder why I ended up in an abusive marriage, because in my mind, I thought that equated to love. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be 49 years old in a couple months. I am remarried to somebody I've known almost 20 years. And I call him my gentle giant because he's very, very tall. He's a big man, but just the sweetest, biggest teddy bear you can imagine. Very patient, very quiet, very much what I need in my life right now for peace. But it's hard to know that these effects of my childhood are still with me, so much so that I remember the very first time this happened, I created chaos out of nothing because I needed to stir up trouble. I needed to stir up trouble to feel love. And you know what it was? He asked me if on my way home, I was about 5 minutes from home, and he asked if I could stop and get a bottle of ketchup. And I don't even remember how I turned that ketchup into a thing, but I was feeling, because he's quiet and I used to get silent treatments, and I don't know, I needed to feel conflict to feel love. And so I came home with that ketchup, but boy, I don't even know where it came out of. I mean, you look at me, you meet me, I think I'm a nice person, and I was starting to crap about ketchup, and I let him have it. God love this man. He put his hand up on the doorway and just kind of leaned there and just had the smirk on his face while I'm, about ketchup. And I came home from work, I had a long day and whatever. And when I stopped, because he wasn't responding, he wasn't reacting at all. He was just standing there with a smirk on his face, like waiting for me to be done. So I stopped. And he said, "Are you done?" And I said, "Well, yeah, but I'm still like, do something, react, we got to have conflict here." And he just put his arm around me and brought me in the house, and we put ketchup on our burgers, and the rest of the night was perfectly wonderful. But, it sounds like a funny story, but how many times do people sabotage perfectly healthy relationships because in their past they had this idea that you needed to feel that conflict to feel love? That makes me sadder than anything else, because there are people, I mean, I've seen it over and over, and I watch it like a train wreck about to happen. I have a new boyfriend, and it's like, oh, here we go again. You meet the guy and you're like, oh God, these people never learn. But you know what? It took me a long time to learn. I was 45 years old when I finally divorced my ex, because it took me 24 years, to wise up, and then another year to get out of it, because of course COVID happened right when I decided that I wanted to talk to an attorney about divorce. So lucky me. But there is hope, and that is what I mainly want to give people. Doesn't matter what your childhood was, no matter how bad it was, you can grow up, and hopefully, even if you're in a toxic marriage, or maybe all you ended up in was in a toxic marriage, because that does happen to many people like you that had a nice family and a nice upbringing, that they sometimes are so nice that they get preyed upon by these abusive people, because they think, oh, they'll tolerate it, they'll see the best in me, they'll stay with me through all this. But no matter where you are and how long you've endured it, there's help. There's goat therapy, music therapy, traditional talk therapy. There's all kinds of people you can connect with in social media groups, through podcasting, whatever it is. There are so many resources available to us now to be able to help us understand our situations and give us the tools to be able to overcome that. Because once you remove all that yucky stuff out of your heart and you don't sit in it, and stay with it, it's amazing that you can have room then for the joy and the blessings of the present and the future. Will that past sometimes come and creep back on you? Yeah. Sometimes you look over your shoulder and it's there, and you might falter. I admittedly, full disclosure, every once in a while, I still have a day where something will just tear me down and I'll have to consciously say to myself, no, Dana, we don't live there anymore. That's the old life. And sometimes I just need to cry it out and get it out and be sad and mourn the past. But, I'm working on book 3, which is the true sequel, which talks more about this, the final overcoming of a lifetime of abuse. And the one thing that I will say that I talk about at the end of it is that healing really is about mourning. It's about mourning the past. It's about mourning what you thought it should have been, what could have been, the hope of what could be, the hope of, who you were versus who you are now. So it's a death of a lot of things. But if you think about it, death is always the birth of something new, So what are the possibilities for somebody? When I was in my first marriage, if somebody would have said, well, what do you want your life to be? Don't you, if there were no limitations, I would have easily said, I want to be married, but I want to be married to somebody that likes me enough to want me alive, and here, minor details. I would want to travel and be social and be happy and be at peace, have inner peace. Simple things we take for granted, but I think everybody wants those. I never would have imagined that I would have been remarried to somebody that so easily accepts me and is patient with, my healing process and my need to stir up trouble about ketchup and what have you. But it's a beautiful thing when you make that decision for yourself. So I just want everybody to know, no matter whether it was your childhood, a marriage, a friendship, whatever it was, there's so much hope. You can have your life be whatever it is. You just have to make the choice and then reach out for help. I'm not very good at asking for help, but once I did and the right person came along that kind of could get through to me in the right way, it was amazing how much progress and how my perspective shifted. So that's what I hope to do for everybody else who's listening.
I want to touch on one more thing real quick, because this obviously goes back to the book. And that is, in the book, you're talking about being the scapegoat child.
Yeah.
Right. And you kind of mentioned the gentleman, also the child named It, how this child was treated much differently, and you experienced that as well. But it's not just about being treated differently. And let me explain that to you. Obviously, I had a sister, so we're 2.5 years apart, but we didn't get treated exactly the same because it's a boy and a girl.
Yes.
Okay. There's differences, right? They're just
100%.
fundamental things there. We're not talking about that, folks. What we're talking about is dramatically different, super apparent, major differences in the way kids are treated. So dive into that just a little bit, Dana, because I want people to really understand what we're talking about with a scapegoat child and the true differences. Maybe give us a couple of examples of the way you were treated versus the way that your brother was treated.
Just a lot of basic things. For example, well, this is more of an adult experience, so this is something that is a little bonus that's not in the book. But so I got my bachelor's degree in journalism and psychology from DePaul University. My brother was 14 years younger. So when he graduated from school, you would have thought that he had become king of the universe, the way that he was hailed in the household. But at one point we were all sitting to dinner and my stepfather was telling my brother, oh, well, you're going to make at least $90,000 a year and you can do this and that. And, everything with these narcissists, it's about, money and having things and attaining, wealth of some sort. And it was just interesting to me because at that point in my life, I was running a 6-figure business. I had a sort of a little housekeeping empire of my own. But I mentioned it as if maybe, I think I was still trying to get approval, and some credit or, some acknowledgement, not to dismiss my brother, but I felt like I was being treated like chopped liver, as they say. And it was just funny because my stepfather was like, oh, well, your education's like a kindergarten education compared to your brother. And I'm like, actually, no, it's equivalent. And he did go on, of course, to get his doctorate. And good for him. I could have gotten my doctorate too. And I'm pretty sure my IQ is higher than his. But it's just like they triangulated us. It was always this kind of a competition. And even when we would speak as adults, my mother was always hovering and always she had to listen in. And if I said anything that she didn't like or that she didn't want my brother to get some perception about, for example, it could be something as simple as him saying, oh, are you coming to this family gathering mom and dad are hosting? Well, no, I wasn't invited, because that was the thing. I wasn't invited. He was always invited, but not me. They would invite my son, though, when he was a teenager and could drive himself, but not me. So I would say, I'm not invited. And so then, this happened twice, actually. I'd get a text right that very second from my mother, who's right there in the next room. Oh, I forgot to mention to you that we're having, you know what I mean? So it's always making me look bad, making me look less, making me understand where my position is in the totem pole on the family. And again, these are light things. But going back to the obvious things, it was, the abuse, the physical abuse specifically. My brother wasn't hit. He wasn't beaten. Nobody put their hands around his neck and tried to kill him. He wasn't thrown downstairs. He wasn't beaten with the phone when he tried to pick it up and call 911 for help like I did once. He wasn't dragged out of bed by his ankles to go pick up his shoes at the front door because there were too many shoes, apparently. He wasn't treated like that at all. Not at all. So, it gives you kind of two different aspects of how it looks in the childhood, very physical differences. But as adults, because that's the thing, abuse changes. Parents don't stop abusing you after you turn 18, but the abuse changes because they know once you turn 18, if they lay a finger on you, well, now you're pressing charges. It's not child services anymore, who looked the other way when they were involved in my home when I was a minor. But now you're talking about the big boys, the police and prison and things like that. So they won't touch you most of the time, but they will still affect you however they can. This has expanded in my life. My mother and stepfather chose to dissociate from me completely years ago, which was devastating, but thankfully it's actually been a good thing because it has removed their effect on me so that I do have the mental and physical space to heal from all that had already been done. But they still in the circles around me. We have some family members that still share, information between us, even though I tell them not to. And there are vile things being said about me, as if they know anything about me. They try to represent that we still have a relationship and communicate, and try to say that I've been diagnosed with this mental health issue or that one. There was even something going around that my mother decided when a family member approached her and said, oh, well, Dana said that you don't talk to her anymore. My mother came up with this idea. I mean, I'm going to be 49. Now, all of a sudden, she was raped and I'm the product of rape. So she can't possibly have a relationship with me. Okay. She named me after my dad. I'm not even going to call him a rapist, but because that's just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life, plus he was in my life since I was 16 years old, and she's the one who gave him our phone number and our address. So I don't buy that for 1 minute, but it just speaks to how they can still, do the things they're doing. It just kind of pokes that bruise that's still there. But, fortunately, I'm in a place where I let it roll off and just say whatever. If people want to believe that, let them believe it. I am not going to defend. I'm not going to fight. I am laying my sword down. I just want a peaceful life for myself. So I'm just over here doing my thing and let them do theirs. And that's just how it has to be, unfortunately.
Just don't ask you to get the ketchup.
Nope. Don't ask me to get ketchup. My poor husband. He's so sweet. I don't think he's ever asked me to get ketchup since then, to be honest.
I mean, there's certain lines you just can't cross.
No.
Maybe you have a repressed memory of ketchup, but you don't know what happened sometime in your childhood with ketchup.
You never know. You never know. You never know.
Oh. All right. So tell me a little bit more about your so obviously you got this one out, you got choking on shame, and you're starting to work on another one.
Yeah,
so
the sequel.
hold up again, where you're going there?
Yeah, the sequel is what comes after Gasping for Air. So it's basically the more recent past since my divorce from my ex-husband, because unfortunately, just like with my parents, he has not gone away despite the no contact order and the order of protection and all the fun stuff. So there's a little more drama with him, and it speaks to the fact that it's a very strange thing that when you divorce somebody who is abusive, the divorce, as I told my son, is a division of financial assets. It does not end the relationship by any means. If anything, and this is actually statistically proven, that domestic violence actually increases after divorcing somebody who is abusive. And I went into that in Gasping for Air, but we're picking up basically from the end there and talking a little more about that, a little more about, the stuff with my parents, just kind of bringing everything full circle. But it also mostly delves into my recovery, my healing, the revelations, the epiphanies I've had, and learning how to trust again and how to open my heart again, that I could get married, that I could even be open to being in a romantic relationship. Because I think no matter who you are and what you've been through, if you've been through stuff like that, you just want to isolate and hide. I always say, I wish I was a turtle. I could just pull my arms and legs in and my head and just hide in my shell and nobody could hurt me. Because we, of course, want to protect ourselves. But it talks about all of that. It's a very deep dive into, the mental health aspect of overcoming all that and kind of going into that healing. And hopefully I can share a little bit of wisdom that'll help some people at least, want to start their own process. But it's to give hope. It's the final full circle, bringing it all to a close, and then we're moving on.
Yeah, and I think that's the vitally important part. That's the part that shocked me in our first interview. And I remember saying to you, and I felt so bad afterwards, that, oh my gosh, Dane, I can't believe you're a normal person. And you can be talking to me right now about these things. And I said that, and I felt terrible about it. And I've told on myself so many times about saying that, because it's just so much. I sit there listening to you talk about all these things, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's just so much. This goes back to, it's so difficult for me to relate. And I'm not saying I want to, okay, but
right.
And you know what I mean. I don't want to be able to relate, because, oh my gosh, all the things that you've gone through are just, they really are unimaginable to me.
Yeah.
It's like I'm not like, no, all this didn't really happen to people. They would have never survived this. Well, you're proof that you can.
Yes, I am proof that you can. And I am just one person. And my story isn't even as horrific as some, but I want to say this to you is that I did not take that in a negative way when you said it before, nor do I now, because actually that is a compliment to me, because if you knew how hard it was for me to get to this point where I don't feel awkward and weird and like I can't talk and I can't be myself, it takes so much strength and bravery for somebody to come out of abuse, out of toxic situations, and be authentic and be real and be vulnerable. It's scary. People hurt. So the fact that you're saying that you think I'm normal, I mean, some might argue differently. Depends on the day. Depends if there's ketchup involved.
Right.
But it is a wonderful thing. And that's exactly my point, because for people like us, all that craziness, that chaos, that horrific stuff is just another Tuesday. It's normal. That's why even when I speak about it, sometimes people are shocked and their mouths drop because they're like, do you hear what you're saying? And you're saying it like, like you're telling me, you're going to the grocery store, because it was normal. I didn't know any different. So thank you again for having me on and letting me share a little bit more of my story. And, hopefully we'll do this again when the third book comes out. But if anyone thinks that they're living a normal life, or that anyone else is, believe me, I don't even think there's a normal. We just hope to come to a place where we're safe and we're at peace. And that's all we can ask for.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it struck me so hard on listening to you and then you being able to share it. So I'm very excited to hear that you're doing that book, because there are people out there that are listening to what you're saying. They can relate in some way, hopefully not all the ways, but in some ways. And as you say, some folks are going to have worse situations, but seeing the part of the journey that got you from there to here, I think that's going to be imperative for so many people to really start putting that piece of the puzzle together. Okay. And I see what you're saying. I had a bad childhood too. And yes, then I ended up in a bad relationship and I'm trying to get out of it. And I think I can get out of it, but my gosh, if I do, then what am I do? Well, I mean, if I don't have that person in my life, then who's going to care about me? Because maybe they're kind of stuck right there, because that's where they want you to be, right? They want you to be right there where if you leave me, you'll have no one and you'll never have anyone. And I know you thought.
Yeah. And that's what I honestly thought.
Over and over.
And you know what? I did another podcast about grief, because, and this I talk about in the sequel, in this third book, that the grief wasn't just of losing my first husband, getting the divorce, which even when it's bad, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of regret and mourning with that. But it was also losing his family, because my mother and stepfather didn't associate with me, and a lot of family went with them. And then a whole other side of the family decided to side with my stepfather and mother. And so I was literally just about to get married to my current husband and literally losing dozens of people, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends. It's like they all died, but it's almost worse because they were choosing not to associate with me anymore, because they honestly believed that I had to be lying and saying these terrible things about somebody that they loved. And the grief that comes with that, you want to talk about feeling alone. And there's other stuff too that has to do with my husband's family, who I knew 20 years and got along with very well up to when we got married. But it's a juicy story. There's a lot of drama for people who just like the drama of life. But there is that aspect, and I agree. It is my favorite and by far, I think, the most important book. So that's why I am kind of being a little more nitpicky with it in how I present the information, because I think it will be the most helpful for people, even if they don't even read the other books. I want them to have some benefit from this.
All right, great. Well, Dana, thank you so much for being with us again. It is always a joy to speak with you, even though what we're talking about is not joyful things. But you're clearly full of joy now. As long as there's not ketchup involved, everything's going to be okay.
This is very true. And yes, thank you so much again for having me on. It's always a pleasure. And definitely anybody that's listening to us, so this, share this with somebody who could use a little joy in their life, because there is hope. Everybody can be okay no matter what.
And if you want to learn more about Dana and you want to pick up her books, you can go to danasdiaz.com. That's danasdiaz.com. You can find The Gasping for Air and also Choking on Shame there. You can buy them directly from the website and learn more about Dana herself and her journey. I'll tell you, it is always a pleasure. Your story is so impactful, and I look forward to that third book as well. And I definitely want to have you back on.
Well, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, folks. Hope everyone enjoyed. Well, I guess that's relative, huh? I hope that this one was not necessarily enjoyable. It had an impact on you in a positive way. If you have never had to deal with any of these things, then consider yourself blessed as well. But if you are, or you're in a situation, know that there's hope.
Yeah.
There are folks out there to help you. I promise you, if you reach out to Dana, she'd be more than happy to visit with you and help you as well. Everyone have a super, super blessed rest of the day, and we'll catch you next time on the Health and Well Power Hour. We are out of here.